I think what stood out to me is how much of what the Bears are trying to do right now revolves around culture and identity and attitude. It's reconnecting with what worked previously. And I know some fans, some listeners, some watchers on YouTube, maybe viewers on YouTube might be rolling their eyes at this, but it worked. That was a brand of football that worked. It was an identity that worked, that won a lot of football games. The difference is you still have Justin Fields, but I think that brand of football, that brand of violence, those swarming tackling, I like that they're trying to bring it back.
And I think one difference, first of all, it's not new to hear a new regime talk about, setting a culture, installing that culture. I mean, that's what they all do, right?
Be you.
But that's what I was going to get at. I don't know that the last regime was ever able to really define what that culture is. Where I don't think there's any doubt of what Matt Eberflus is preaching every time we've had a chance to talk to him. And you can roll your eyes at the acronyms and whatever, call him a football guy, whatever. But it's there.
How long have you heard critics complain about the Bears about not having a football guy? They have an ultimate football guy.
Yeah.
Seemingly here in Matt Eberflus.
But you know what I mean? Like, how many times, we're 3 years into the Matt Nagy era and we're still asking him, hey, what is your identity?
Yeah.
Whereas, not only with Matt Eberflus can you hear him talk about it, but there's evidence of what it already is. Whether you look at his defenses in Indianapolis which is why I think we were talking about Lovie Smith. This goes back to... You heard him mention. I found that very interesting, actually. Him talking about that Super Bowl win that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had over the Raiders, and him saying, "Hey, wait a minute! What are they doing with this Tampa 2? How do I incorporate this into what I'm doing?" And then he's basically run with it ever since. That's almost 20 years ago now.
Yeah, he's not denying that a Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks, or John Lynch wouldn't help. He's not denying that Brian Urlacher wouldn't help, Julius Peppers. He mentioned them themselves. But I think there's a certain attitude that helps as well. We know that. We should see that.
The Bears had that attitude in 2018.
They had that attitude. They had that swagger. BU meant something that eventually evolved into being many things as opposed to being one thing. But we know that wins can come from this system, this style of play that he wants to bring here. And again, I think the difference is you have a quarterback this time, a young quarterback, in Justin Fields to help see this through. It's not like you have to trade for Jay Cutler or take a swing on Rex Grossman and later in the first round of the draft. You already have Justin Fields here for you to build around, which changes the conversation a bit, but you heard from Eberflus himself. Fields, the quarterback, does fit into this system, this culture that they want.
Right, because of the work ethic he's already established and the leadership side that he's already established, even just as a rookie, despite not having great results on the field. Let's get to Fields here in a second, but sticking on the defensive side of the ball, one example I wanted to bring up specifically when you talk about this culture is potentially a guy like Eddie Jackson. And when you heard Flus talk to us about how hustle and intensity can, and it's not just individually, but the whole unit can turn a C+ player into a B+ player. And I think in some ways, when you look back at Eddie Jackson's 2018 season, there's no question that that's probably sort of what happened, right? Vic Fangio. He's a talented player, but the whole swagger and the whole defensive unit gelling help result in him getting the amount of takeaways and getting his hands on the football as many. And everyone's wondering where that went. And then the trickle-down effect of that is, okay, when all of that's not clicking and you don't have 7 guys running the football, as you said, that's the goal on some of these plays, it's going to result in some missed tackles in one-on-one situations or just the identity, going back to that word, of how you're playing every single snap. So when I look at Eddie Jackson, I think of a player that can specifically benefit from this type of culture that he's trying to put into the defense. It's no guarantee it will happen, but I also found it interesting this morning when we talked to Eberflus as a group. he said it would be a clean slate for Eddie Jackson this season in this defense.
The tape, you have to go back a couple of years, but the tape could still be good. I don't think his tape was even that bad this year, if I'm just being honest. That may get some eye rolls out there, but I really don't think it was. I just think the attrition on this defense was just intense, too much to almost overcome. To go back to 2018, this may be cliched to say, but I've always felt this way, that in retrospect, the loss of Vic Fangio was almost insurmountable. How much that defense in 2018 took on the identity of their coach. Not Matt Nagy, but Vic Fangio.
But their defensive coach, yeah.
And how much the identity of the team goes back to that head coach and how things kind of unraveled after that 2018 season.
That's a real thing, though.
It's a very real thing.
And you and I witnessed that when Lovie Smith left. Like, a lot of those players were the same, granted that they were, you did lose Urlacher, but that contributes it too. Like, you take away the head coach that had put that culture in, then you take away the biggest leader, right, on that side of the football. Well, it's no wonder that even though some of those other talented players are still there, that the whole unit starts to fall apart. Like, so it's about getting that back. And that's why coaching matters.
Yeah, and I like that Matt Eberflus has made it a point to connect with those guys. Mm-hmm. They didn't win a Super Bowl. They got close, but that era of Bears football won a lot of football games.
Yeah.
It was a darn good era of football. You knew what you were getting. They were competitive almost every single year, despite the problems they had at quarterback and offense. They competed. You knew what you were getting.
Well, and I've seen some people roll their eyes at that idea, like, how can former players really help you?
I don't know, because they're former players who may have some insight in how, players tend to work.
Well, and an even more specific example is if your whole thing is trying to create takeaways and you're a team that's struggled to take the ball away, and you have a guy who still lives in the Chicago area named Charles Tillman who literally invented the peanut punch, why would you not have that guy come out to your practice facility and show your players how he did that?
Right. Or if you're going to move Roquan Smith to the weak side linebacker, there's a darn good one that talks after games in NBC Sports Chicago.
Yeah. No, it's not just about having them share their ideas to the head coach over the phone. Like, it sounds like he wants these guys to come visit, and is going to try to get these guys to come through the building and not only physically share some of the techniques that they might be able to show, but also explain to these players what worked from that era.
Yes.
Why they got so close, why that culture was there, and why the results were produced. I actually don't understand why anyone would roll their eyes at that. At a minimum, it can't hurt you.
No.
And there are definitely some benefits that can come from it.
Flus didn't. I called him Flus. I think that works. That sounded all right, right?
Yeah, I think I did too a few minutes ago.
Okay, so I think Flus didn't exactly come out and say it, but in a way he seems to be looking for tips, advice. Like you just said, for what worked, what clicked, why Lance Briggs liked playing for Rod Marinelli and Lovie Smith, why Brian Urlacher became Lovie Smith's leader. This is a first-time head coach. He can find answers all over the place, but I like that he's going back to the recently most successful era of Bears football. Guys that are still in town. Guys that are all over television or on billboards for hair ads, depending who you're talking to.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you know what it takes to win in the city, and you're really the last successful team that did it somewhat consistently, and you're a coaching staff that hasn't been here, or a GM who hasn't been here, why would you not tap into that knowledge?
Yeah.
To me, it seems like an easy thing to do. And
what I like is that they don't, the impression I get from Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus is they don't think they have all the answers, but they're trying to develop the best answers they can for now and the future in terms of identity, culture, and personnel.
Which brings us to some of the conversation with Ryan Poles yesterday, where I sensed some humility in addressing specifically the Larry Ogunjobi thing. and he wasn't afraid to talk about like how it was a setback. Like that's a good way to put it. Unfortunate for everyone involved, especially for Larry Ogunjobi, who didn't get the contract, the life-changing contract he thought he was getting. But for the Bears too, it sure sounds like they were misled a little bit, and at least did not. Once they were able to get the player into their building and do the scans that they needed to get, it was not what they were expecting based on the conversations that had led up to them agreeing to terms with the guy. And Poles admitted that it cost them a few days.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the moment that stuck out to me from that conversation that we had, that they went into free agency considering spending money and at least a first wave splash, which turned out to be Ogunjobi. By agreeing to that deal, they could not make other moves because that was the money they committed to that.
Yeah.
And that's something to learn from. But that's okay. It really is. I think so.
Well, and that's what we're getting back at, or what you just talked about a few minutes ago, which was the idea that these guys are not acting like they know everything and that they're willing to learn from what plays out. Like, that's all you really want to ask from these guys. Every single GM, every single head coach is going to make mistakes through the process. Eberflus is going to challenge a play that everybody's going to be bitching about. It's going to happen. It's just going to happen. And the whole point is learning from those mistakes. So, it's unfortunate that Larry Ogunjobi was Brian Poles' first signing. I still think at the end of it, you learn lessons. You made the right call not to sign the guy for what you had agreed to based on the information
left the door open for potential signing down the road for a lesser deal.
Sure. But it still is unfortunate that you probably missed out on a different player or two, depending on who those guys might have been, that could have helped the team. So now, next year when you go through the whole process again, and maybe you're willing to spend even more next year, when you have a lot more cap space, you might be a little bit better of a football team. You now have those experiences to go back on.
I'm glad you brought that up, because just from talking with Flus, whether it's the breakfast in the courtyard or on the couches that we're sitting on right now, maintaining that long-term vision, he seems to be comfortable doing that.
Mm-hmm.
There's not this win now pressure or stress that I felt like existed in 2015. Where John Fox and really the front office, George McCaskey and Ted Phillips, talked about quick turnarounds. They kept Jay Cutler for 2 years. They're not talking about that right now. And I think Flus, got to find a way to call him, describe Flus, like, although this may be a struggle for him because he wants to win games, but he seems to be comfortable maintaining that long-term vision or this plan that Ryan Poles and himself are bringing to fruition in terms of roster construction, identity building, all those things in terms of building a different foundation for the Bears.
And it brings it. You saying that just kind of brought me back to 2015, and maybe the comparisons we can make between holding on to Jay Cutler too long and cutting ties with Khalil Mack right away, because I think those contracts, those situations are somewhat comparable where, and I don't remember exactly where, Cutler's contract was big. I don't remember exactly what the dead money would have been. But I do know, and we've heard the stories over the years, that there were other general managers candidates. There were other head coaching candidates that when they interviewed came in and said, we need to start there at the quarterback. We need to get Jay out of there, start over.
A true clean slate.
And wherever level it came in, that did not happen. Even though it seems like in hindsight, Ryan Pace probably felt the same way, if not right away, pretty quickly, that they had to go in a different direction at quarterback. But instead, they didn't make that move right away. So Cutler's contract lingers. Like, instead of taking that huge hit right away and clearing things out for 2016, it lingered for a couple of years before you were able to finally cut ties. And in this case, with Khalil Mack, who's quite frankly a better player, they made we heard Eberflus say today it was unanimous. Everyone was on the same page with it, that it was the right thing to do to set the Bears up for better success going forward, not necessarily in 2022 when you're losing, your best pass rusher, you're eating a lot of money on the cap, but starting next season, you're going to have all that space to work with. And by the way, I still think the defense is going to be solid this year.
Well, just based on coaching, it should be. Yeah. I think that goes back to organizational messaging, organizational goals. I'll still remember Ted Phillips standing in the corner of the PNC Center. I don't know if it was called the PNC Center back then, but the media room of Hallis Hall, and talking about quick turnarounds and how John Fox has a history of them and how that was a goal. Or how George McCaskey would say back then that winning the Super Bowl is a goal every single season. That type of pressure doesn't seem to exist, rightfully doesn't seem to exist for Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus in 2022, nor should it be there in 2023. They're being afforded the time and the patience to build something. Now, Ryan Pace was afforded that at a certain point in his career with the Bears, but Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus seem to be getting that from the very beginning.
Yeah. No, I think that's and to their credit, maybe that's George and Ted learning from those past experiences and realizing that you should probably let the general manager tell you how good the team's going to be and not just come in and be like, yeah, quick turnaround, let's do it. Because that roster had nothing back in 2015.
Oh, it didn't need it. I think if
especially
you
on
defense. I think if you talk to folks from that organization back then who worked for the Bears in 2015, they would tell you they wish they did more.
I don't know what I think you just combined
Poles,
Nick Foles, and Nick Folk, the kicker who never played for the Bears, but I think you somehow just combined that all into one word.
I think my mind said people, but my mouth said folks.
Those are two different words, but that mean the same thing. Yes, but yeah,
yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that was a fun conversation. I thought so.
And you heard it there. He's contractually bound to doing the Hoge Jahns podcast.
Done. I don't know who snuck that in the contract,
but we're thankful.
But thank you. I mean, I knew we had a little bit of pull at Hallis Hall, but I didn't know that much.
Yeah.
That's huge.
I like for the obsession in this town, not Palm Beach, but Chicago, about the Bears needing and requiring a football guy. They have two football guys. They exude football guy-isms.
Yeah.
From the hits to the M&M stuff. Like this, roll your eyes at it if you want. I find it somewhat encouraging.
Now, I want to be clear. I still have my reservations, and we've certainly learned our lesson about jumping all in and trusting the guys that are hired here, because we all know how this usually ends in Chicago. But we also have a part of our job, including being reserved about some of the stuff that they're preaching to us and asking questions about them and pushing back a little bit, is also you have to give them at least a little bit of benefit of the doubt, because it's not their fault that the Bears have been in this position. It's they have nothing to do with the organization until the day that they start their job. Do I think that they've done enough to help Justin? I still don't feel that way.
I agree.
I'm also willing to sit here and understand that it's, what is today, March 29th as we record this, and there's a lot more time. We saw the Bears sign two guys in Jason Peters and Alec Ogletree in August last year that made a difference, that were solid players, more than solid in Jason Peters' case. So there's still a lot that can happen, but I still am all right, understand the approach you guys are taking. Still have some questions about what's going on.
I think we have to remind ourselves to be patient as well. I just think since the theme of this podcast has become learning from lessons, I like what I'm hearing more from Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles than I heard from Mark Trestman and Phil Emery in 2013. I was at those owners' meetings. Mm-hmm. I like what I'm hearing more from Poles and Eberflus than I heard in 2015 from Fox and Pace. I was at those owners' meetings too. We've been through this. Even 2018, when things seemed to be changing, and we saw that play out in 2018 with that season, winning the division, going to the playoffs. You could feel that. this feels different to me than 2013, 2015. I find it more encouraging just in terms of messaging, principles, identity building, foundation setting.
Yeah.
Feels different, seems different, all of the above.
I think so too. And this is kind of it's interesting because we heard in that interview with Eberflus how you could just kind of feel the defense sometimes, right? That feeling. A lot of that, and we've talked about this on this podcast before. That's part of what we do too. Like you just have sometimes a feeling about how things are going. And to me, almost the attitude that Ryan Poles had talking to us yesterday was more important than anything he actually said. Like there was a different level of confidence that I felt from his introductory press conference and even at the Combine. I felt he was more comfortable at the Combine, but I thought yesterday he spoke with conviction a little bit more. And he wasn't afraid to share things, and he treated... Because when you're not only talking to the media, you're talking to your fan base, right? And he treated everyone like he didn't insult anyone's intelligence, if that makes sense. Like, we know the Ogunjobi thing wasn't great.
Yeah.
We talked about that when it happened. So he didn't treat it like, he didn't try to say, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. Right. Which has sometimes happened a lot with this organization.
What did he say about the Ryan Bates move or lack thereof? It stinks.
Which he literally found out like as he was talking to us.
Yes,
I guess.
It stinks.
Yeah.
It's a first-time GM. There are things for him to experience for the first time.
Yeah.
Matt Eberflus is the first-time head coach. He's got to experience things for the first time, and that applies to game day. That applies right now here in Palm Beach. It applies in the preseason, training camp, all that stuff. But in terms of messaging, which is all we have right now to evaluate, to critique, I like the feel of it more than grow the man in 2013. We know it's worked.
Yeah.
It requires talent, but we know that attitude works. We know it resonates with the right players. Those right players are still active in the city of Chicago.
What else? Go ahead, I'm listening.
So here's what's interesting about the button I just pushed. I don't know what I just pushed.
They have these things called labels.
So I have labels on here. And it's a little, our listeners can't see this because this is one of the few episodes we've done recently where we don't have video. And we apologize for that, but it's part of our setup
you can see
here
our pictures.
But we have some good photos. Hopefully you're enjoying that. If you're watching on YouTube right now, find our YouTube channel, Hoge Jahns. Appreciate you. But usually this board in front of me, these are called hot buttons. And there's like a thing that sits here, Johns, that labels them. And I lost that somewhere in my bag transporting this. I have it. It's just not on it right now. So now it's like a mystery button. Instead of having it labeled, the only one I know for sure is
no.
That I know is Mike Glennon. Because I press it a lot.
The purple button.
That one I know. I think the one I pressed earlier was Matt Nagy, which is why I pressed it, but I may have been off by a button. So if it wasn't, you just gotta, it's guess what noise is about to come out. I don't know.
Here's Josh sitting talking about smoking meats.
That was a good one. That's not on this board, but I do love that soundbite. All right, well, here's the deal. It is getting into be mid-afternoon on Tuesday. These owners' meetings are almost done. Flus is done. The GMs, I think, are done. The owners, I think, have one more meeting, and then we're going to hear from George McCaskey a little bit later on today, which will be his first time talking since hiring Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus. And then really the only thing left to do is have a couple beers and hang out on the beach.
Sounds like a plan. I'll be there.
We wish you guys were all here with us. We do, actually. But I'm looking forward to that. I'm tired.
Me too.
Why are all these NFL I don't mean to be complaining, but the way they pack these NFL events in the Combine's the same way. It's like sleep little, work a lot.
Work a lot. Well, our first meeting, our first interview session was at 7:45 Eastern time, which is 6:45 Chicago time.
That's part of it, yes.
And I am never up out of bed and fully active and showered and engaged in life until at least 7:10.
Well, and they always have this big NFL reception the night before.
Yes, that does not help either.
So the AFC coaches got off the hook because they split them up this year, and the AFC coaches talked Monday, but Monday night was the reception. So the NFC coaches had to go bright and early. I mean, the sun was literally rising as we got here.
Yes, yeah, it was.
Beautiful, by the way. So I'm not complaining about that. Not complaining at all, actually. But I just find that I've always found that interesting. Let's have this massive NFL party, and then I'll make all the coaches wake up
Early.
Yeah.
Like
there was some photo going on Twitter today where Kyle Shanahan looked like he was half asleep.
That man needed some McDonald's breakfast.
I definitely needed more coffee than I had this morning. But this is one of my favorite events of the year. And hopefully you enjoyed our conversation from the owners' meetings, and having Matt Eberflus on the podcast was awesome. So we thank him and the Bears for letting that happen. You and Kevin will be back later this week with another episode kind of following up on all this stuff.
Yes, on Thursday I think we'll play some of George McCaskey's press conference from later today.
Yep.
Bring you some of those highlights. But yes, enjoy your little getaway move.
Yeah, it's not really a getaway. It's plenty of work that'll be happening. But yeah, it will be taking off a couple days here at the end of the week. So it'll be Adam Jahns, Kevin Fishbane with you later on. Make sure you're tuning in for that on Thursday. We're out of here for now. Follow us on Twitter at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns. Whole interview up on YouTube as well. All our podcasts are up on YouTube. Find that on the Hoge Jahns YouTube page. Check us out. ObviousShirts.com. The merch is all up. Good time to get those hats and those t-shirts now as we get into some warmer weather. So check that out at ObviousShirts.com. And you guys will be back later in the week.
See ya. Hey, what's up, Flus?